Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who have been following along for a while now, you know that I released a detailed YouTube video describing the breakdown of my Audi RS6 in Yukon, Canada. The video was shot in Alaska. It was way too long, it had poor audio quality, and I was kind of still overshadowed with the frustration with Audi at that time. So today I'm going to retell the story in a much more concise manner. So I hope you enjoy this video, and I'll go ahead and play the intro as I had previously.
Good morning, everyone. It is currently 4:03 in the morning. As it sits today, the RS6 has 26,016 miles on it. So we're going to keep track of that and see how many miles we end up accruing by the end of the journey. But I suspect today is going to be quite a lot of boring driving. So let's get to it.
I got all the malfunctions. I'm in neutral. I'm going to coast as far as I can.
I am now pulling on the side of the Alaskan highway.
For those of you who haven't followed the adventure on my channel, let me give you a quick rundown. In December of 2021, I bought an Audi RS6 Avant with the intention of doing an epic road trip across all of United States and Canada. My goal was to reach the top of Alaska, ending in the small town of Prudhoe Bay. After purchasing the car, I spent the next 6 months making modifications and customizing the car for the journey. Among the most significant of the modifications were the Quattro Heritage vinyl wrap based on the Audi RS6 GTO concept car, and also other older Audi Heritage vehicles. The custom roof rack, which had to be fabricated and modified by Hefner Performance. The Skoal SK18 21-inch wheels with all-season Pirellis on them, and I had a spare one of those as well. The Baja Design S8 light bar I had installed in the car, custom skid plates provided by Auto Mods, full Miltech exhaust, and finally we did a full custom hand-cut and carpet-wrapped interior where we removed the rear seats of the car and basically outfitted it with extra storage and a place to sleep. So I began the trip on May 26th of 2022. Over the course of the next 2 months, I made pit stops in Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming until I finally met up with my buddy Harrison, who has a lifted Porsche Cayenne, and we had really only formally met over social media. So Met up with him, and we both had planned to do the drive up through northern Canada. Harrison and I then proceeded to drive north through Washington, into Canada, up through Banff, and into the Canadian Rockies. Things started to go awry after we had left the Rockies, and now we're deep into the Yukon territory of Canada. All right, so the rest of this is unscripted. So we've been driving up through the Canadian Rockies, which were magnificent. We continued up, and eventually the landscape started to kind of level out. There weren't massive mountains. There was just more like rolling hills and essentially just countryside. So throughout my whole trip with the Audi RS6, I had been experiencing kind of like minor electronic gremlins. Some of which just little stuff, like my phone would just decide to disconnect from the infotainment system. Okay, so my Audi's been doing that all day, which has been really annoying, as my phone has been cutting out, losing connection to Bluetooth, and then randomly cutting back in. At one point, my backup camera just decided to stop working. At one point, my infotainment system just turned off completely. The screens were blank. Just really like weird random stuff. This, however, didn't indicate to me anything super wrong with the car other than maybe Audi needs to get their firmware, dialed in. I certainly did not anticipate what was going to happen. So once we were out in the countryside in Canada, we had just been pulling over occasionally at various rest stops and maybe points of interest. And we had decided to pull over at this kind of abandoned gas station rest stop facility. There was a couple old Mercedes parked in the middle of it, and we just wanted to get out and take some pictures. Now, another thing that there was at this location was a bison. Now, we had previously passed a whole herd of bison on the side of the road. And it was quite a spectacle. They had their, babies with them, and then obviously the adults. And this bison was a baby bison all by itself, and I could tell that it was limping. And in some kind of messed up way, it kind of related and pertained to the issues that were soon to come for me. So after exploring this area, I hopped back in my car, turned it on, and immediately received my first warning light. The warning light that popped up was a electrical system malfunction. Please contact service. And that was actually followed by another light which said sport differential malfunction, please contact service. So at this point, I was a little nervous, but I was hoping that maybe the warning lights would just go away if I restarted the car, let the ECU power down, something like that. I did let Harrison know that I had the warning lights at that time.
Evan's getting some weird issues. Something with the rear diff, something with the start system, and something electronic that says see the dealer immediately. But the car still runs and drives fine, so we're not going to see the dealer immediately. Evan's trying to read the codes right now and see if he brings up anything.
And yeah, we didn't really have a choice other than to push on, because the closest Audi dealership was over 1,000 miles away in Anchorage. So we pushed on. So we continued up the road, and I still have these lights flashing in my face. And we eventually get to a piece of road that no longer exists. And what I mean by that is, if you guys read the news this last summer, a beaver created a dam over top of the Alaska Highway. The dam broke and washed away a 250-foot section of road. Now, thankfully, by the time we had got there, which was in late summer, they had rebuilt basically a way around it. But we did stop there and, stand there in awe and look at this massive expanse of road that was gone. And it also was, in my mind, a little bit more foreshadowing, turn around. Now, we had been waiting kind of past the area you were supposed to wait, because they had a follow me car that you were supposed to follow around the detour around the collapsed highway. And we just wanted to go check out the highway, so we went right up there. This was the first instance I'd actually experienced a problem, physical issue with the RS6. I hit the start button and it did not start. I hit it again, it did not start. And finally, I mashed the brake and held down the button, and the car started up. Now, I still had these two warning lights. Nothing had kind of changed at this point, and I didn't tell Harrison that I had this issue initially. So, but thank goodness we got back to the spot we were supposed to be, waiting for the follow me car, and we proceeded to follow the car around the detour. After that, it was more kind of just straight roads and woods for another maybe 25, 30 miles or so. And eventually, maybe after another 30 minutes of driving, the light came on. That light was the electrical system malfunction, safely stop vehicle. Now, at this point, the car was still operating and driving, although it did feel like it was in limp mode, reduced power. And I basically radioed to Harrison, this is what's going on. And I'm going to drive this car as far as I can until it will not let me drive it any further. And the closest town, which, we're in Yukon, Canada, it's barely a town, but the closest town was over 50 kilometers away. So we still had a ways to go before we reached any kind of civilization that could help. Well, maybe another 5 minutes later, I got a Christmas tree of lights on my dash. The primary one was a transmission malfunction, which basically forced the car into neutral, and I coasted as far as I could until I came to a stop on the side of the Alaska Highway in Yukon, Canada.
Parking, I got all the malfunctions. I'm in neutral.
Transmission malfunction, now the car is in neutral.
I'm gonna coast as far as I can.
This is gonna be a bad time. I don't know if he's even gonna make it up this hill. Probably time to bust out the tow rope and try and pull him into town. Gotta be a bad alternator or something.
Okay, update. So the electrical system gave me a major malfunction, and then shortly followed by a transmission malfunction. The car went into neutral, and I was forced to pull over on the side of the road. And so now we are both on the side of the road. We have no cell service. There is a town about 50 kilometers from here we're going to try to make it to. I can't drive the car, but we are going to attempt to tow the RS6 behind the Porsche. So hopefully that works out. We'll see.
So at this point it was evening time. I was basically stuck on the right side of the highway. Harrison had pulled over on the left, and we had a quick brainstorm session of what we were going to do. Well, the thing that popped into our head is, hey, maybe we can tow the RS6 with the Cayenne into town, so at least I don't have to leave it on the side of the road tonight. The Audi RS6 will not go into neutral. I later suspected this as a result of Audi's kind of fail-safe features to protect the transmission, but we tried about everything to get the car to stay in neutral and failed. We did hook the car up to Harrison's car with a tow rope and managed to drag it a couple feet before we realized that the wheels weren't turning and it just wasn't going to work. It's worth mentioning that at pretty much any point when Harrison and I were outside, we were being swarmed by more mosquitoes than either of us had ever experienced in our entire life. Every single time you open the door on the car, I mean, seriously, 40 or 50 mosquitoes would end up in the car, and I would end up basically punching the windshield until we killed most of them. It was awful. So our next plan of action was to leave my car on the side of the road and basically drive into town. So I unloaded a lot of my valuable equipment, loaded it up into Harrison's Cayenne, and we rode into town in search of a hotel. Obviously, we're not going to get help in a small town in the middle of nowhere at 10 o'clock at night. Well, we rolled into town. We went to 2 different hotels. They had no rooms available. One of them suggested a little cabin another 20 kilometers up the road. So we ended up going there and staying the night there. The 2 owners of the cabins were somewhat helpful. They helped us make some calls. I ended up having to use a payphone. I don't know what that bill was, but I called Audi roadside assistance, naturally. And I spoke to a gentleman for like an hour and a half, and he made things sound really encouraging. He made things sound like, yeah, we're going to get you help. You know, I'm going to have to like get this approved by my managers, but it shouldn't be a problem. We're going to figure it out. And basically, you know, I'm going to call you the next day. The place that we're at now, I don't have any cell service or Wi-Fi, but we'll probably go into that town tomorrow, and I'll try to kind of settle in a place where I have both of those things. And in the event that both of us miss the call, what can we do to call back? All right, that sounds good. Well, then I will look for that tomorrow, and I thank you again for all the help. So we stayed in these small little cabins, got eaten by mosquitoes, then proceeded the next day to go back into the town. Well, I never received a call. So I called again. We found some Wi-Fi to mooch off of at a random grocery store. And I called Audi roadside multiple times. And I basically received very unhelpful results. I spoke to 2 different people that were not the person I spoke to the night before. They both told me like, hey, you're just gonna have to find your own tow company and apply for reimbursement. And so at that point, I felt pretty screwed. I had also called AAA. I had AAA insurance, and I was like, well, maybe they'll help me out. Well, they couldn't help me out either. Basically saying that, oh, we can only cover a tow into town kind of thing. So I eventually did some Google Maps searching, found a local tow company, and they sent their tow truck driver out, and they managed to jump the Audi RS6 and get it on the trailer and bring it back to their little, you know, junkyard warehouse, basically. Well, from there we had to figure out what to do. Got the car towed into town. We are now transferring all of the essential stuff from my car into Harrison's car. It's going to be a tight fit, and then we're going to figure out everything else in Whitehorse. So there's a tow company in Whitehorse actually coming down to where we are now, going to pick up the car and then take it to Anchorage. I'm not looking forward to the bill. Hopefully Audi can help me out on that. So I think the plan for the rest of the day is just to kind of get to Whitehorse, get the rest of this squared away, and continue on our trip. And the next closest major town with any kind of resources was the town of Whitehorse. And this town, I believe, was around 500 kilometers away, several hour drive away. At this point, I had made the decision, well, my car obviously is not going to continue this trip. It's going to have to go to an Audi dealership. So I decided, let's go ahead and find somebody who can take it across the Canadian border into Alaska and take it to the Audi dealership there. So the tow truck driver who had towed my car into the small town of Watson Lake knew somebody in Whitehorse who could actually potentially tow my car to Canada. He had warned me that it would not be cheap. Well, I got in contact with him, and he agreed to drive, you know, basically 5 hours from Whitehorse all the way down to Watson Lake, pick up the Audi RS6 and drive it, you know, basically 15, 16 hours to Anchorage.
So we made it to Whitehorse, about 450 kilometers from the last time we were in. We met up with the tow guy, and he gave Evan a quote of
a lot of money. It was $2,500 to tow it here and $3,500 to tow it to Anchorage.
Which doesn't really make sense.
No, because
the numbers don't add up.
Anchorage is significantly farther than towing it here. But anyway, it's getting done. They, I guess, have to get a special transport pass in order to get it over the border. So they said the latest the car would leave is Monday. It's Friday now. It's not really a big deal. We won't be there anyway.
Yeah.
And yeah, then it just goes to Audi of Anchorage, and then we wait and find out how bad the damage is.
Yeah, hopefully they're able to get parts or something by the time that our trip is coming to an end, or at least by the time we're in Anchorage.
I sure hope so.
Evan is also thinking about just selling the RS6 to the dealer and going home with a GT4 if they have one.
If they have one, it might be an option.
Crazy. We'll see what happens.
So this has obviously been a massive headache at this point. My goal of reaching Prudhoe Bay at this point, at the top of Alaska, was kind of crushed. However, Harrison's goal was to make it to the top of Canada and make it to the Arctic Ocean. And we were going to still continue to do that. Now, obviously, Harrison and I were traveling together now in the same vehicle, which posed an issue. Harrison and I had been sleeping in our cars up until this point. So, in order to, well, there were really no hotels. So I was forced to buy a tent and essentially tent camp in the Arctic Circle. And it was a little brutal. The mosquitoes, again, were the worst I have ever experienced in my whole life. Another factor that did not help was the fact that the sun would never go below the horizon. Up in northern Canada, in the Arctic Circle, the sun never sets in the summertime. So that was definitely a unique and slightly miserable experience. But thankfully, the weather did play along. It was not cold. It was maybe in the 50s, maybe 40s at night. I had a sleeping bag. I was in my clothes, in a tent. I was okay. So I actually created a separate video that I'll link right here that covers pretty much that whole journey after Whitehorse, up into Dawson City, up the Dempster Highway, and up to Tuktoyaktuk, which is the northernmost town in Canada and basically borders on the Arctic Ocean. Through the course of making the journey up to the Arctic Ocean, I learned a few things. For starters, I had been in contact with the dealership. They had basically informed me, as I suspected, that the alternator on the vehicle had basically gone bad. Now, the car at this point had around 38,000 miles on it, which, you know, in my opinion, is not that many. Certainly not enough for a major failure like that. And the other thing they informed me was that the alternator was on back order and would not be available for basically potentially months. And the reason for that is it is a proprietary 48-volt system that they only put in their higher end models. And yeah, so essentially I was without a car and with no ETA on when the car would be fixed. So after returning from the Arctic Ocean and spending a couple days in Dawson City, I was really ready to get over to Alaska, back to my car, back to my things that I had left in the car, and basically was just pushing Harrison to be like, hey, let's go. We need to go. And so finally we set off, and it essentially took maybe 13 or 14 hours from Dawson City. We went on the top of the world highway. We went through Chicken, Alaska, and a lot of these other just small random towns in the middle of nowhere, until we finally came down and through Palmer all the way to Anchorage. This was not an easy ride either. The Dempster Highway had taken a toll on Harrison's car. His front shocks were destroyed. His tie rod actually came out on the highway and we had to fix it. Yeah, so we were both tired and stressed. Thankfully, I was given the opportunity to stay at a pilot house. Now, what that is I have a client up in Alaska, Blue River Aviation. They do a lot of amazing things, a lot of Alaska exploration, flight training, stuff like that. And they basically have these houses that they rent out to student pilots and allow them to stay there while they're training. He was gracious enough to let me stay in one of those houses. Once I had rested up, we went to the Audi dealership. Obviously, the news, I had already basically known the whole situation. And in my mind, I had come up with a solution, and that solution was to purchase another vehicle and drive it back to Florida. Now, initially, I had looked at a couple of their used cars. I had looked at a Porsche Cayenne, funny enough. I thought there would be some irony in driving one of those back. They had a nice Cayenne Turbo. Thankfully, actually, Audi corporate or a corporate representative did step in and help me out a little bit. They essentially paid for the $6,600 tow from Whitehorse, Canada to the dealership, and also wanted me to buy an Audi. So they agreed that they would be able to help me out if I purchased an Audi from the dealership. So that's what I did. And of all of the Audis they had there, the most relatable one to the RS6 was an A6 All-Road. And the A6 is essentially the base version of the RS6. It is better equipped for off-roading and exploring. It's got basically adjustable magnetic suspension, height adjustable, bigger tires, and it's got the same kind of plush interior. So the RS6 obviously wasn't functional. I traded it into the dealership, and I did remove some of my equipment, like the roof rack, and actually set up the stock wheels. Big shout out to OE Wheels for helping me get some of my equipment shipped up to Alaska. They're a huge wheel distributor and a good client of mine, so can't thank them enough for that. So now that things were kind of settled, I basically had some opportunity to explore a little bit of Alaska. Now, this is the first time I had been to Alaska in the summer. I've only previously visited Alaska twice in the wintertime. I got to spend a little bit of time with Blue River Aviation doing some flying, and we went up to Hatcher's Pass, and there's just so many incredible views there. If you've never been to Alaska, it's definitely a surreal place to visit. And yeah, so that basically concludes kind of the step-by-step process of basically my car being fine to breaking down to getting a new car. And then obviously I had to drive that A6 All-Road all the way back to Florida. Now, I am going to make a separate video on my drive back through Canada, because I flew my friend up from Denver, and we did kind of like a crazy like cannonball run through Canada. We essentially did Canada in 2.5 days, which I don't recommend, but if you need to get back to civilization and get back to the United States quickly, it can be done. Now, I know I've recounted pretty much everything that happened, but I want to kind of express my own opinion on how things happened, right? So obviously, like, I understand mechanical failures can happen even on new cars. And you take that risk when you buy a car and decide to drive it across the country. Yes, the car did break down in about the worst possible place that it could have on the trip. I will say I was extremely disappointed in Audi roadside. The first person that I had spoken to again was very polite and made me feel like I was going to get help. And then no follow-up. No follow-up to someone who owns an Audi RS6, which is a very kind of it's like Audi's halo car. It's like, it's got all the hype. It's, they want to promote this car and promote the brand and promote their super wagons in the States. And I felt like I was kind of left high and dry. And honestly, the responses I got from the next two representatives that I talked to from Audi roadside were rather rude. So I definitely didn't enjoy that. It was nice of the Audi representative to step in and pay for that $6,000 plus tow bill and help me out getting into a new Audi. That being said, I don't think it was enough. I'll be honest. The amount of effort and money and time that I put into that vehicle to make that trip, and kind of I didn't really mention this earlier, but I mean, I have a long history of owning Audis. I've always loved the Audi brand. I associate that with my dad and my family. We've always had Audis, and this was kind of that culmination of my passion for the brand and my desire to explore the country in that car. So yeah, a $6,000 tow, that's great. But I would have not minded having my car. Would have been nice. Or some sort of corporate step in. I mean, if somebody basically famous had an RS6 and it broke down, I have like no doubt in my mind that Audi would find a way to give them another one to complete whatever journey they're on. Now again, I'm not famous. There's probably gonna be a couple hundred people watching this video. I get it, but still, come on, Audi. So one thing I couldn't have really touched on in my previous video, but I can say now, is I do know the new owner of the car. The car eventually did get fixed, and he is enjoying the hell out of it in Alaska. I think that he basically saw the opportunity to own an RS6 because they really don't get many of them up there. I think there might be one other RS6 Avant in all of Alaska. So he snatched it up, and he's been enjoying it. And he also has a 911 GT3, which is one of my all-time favorite cars. So I'm glad that the car found a good home. So to summarize, well, I would like to make the trip again successfully. It won't be in an Audi, I can tell you that much. But yeah, overall, the whole trip was an incredible experience. I learned so much, and I would not give it up for anything. I met so many amazing people, so many helpful people. Again, I can't thank Harrison enough. Had I not had him there, I literally would have been stranded, probably hitchhiking, and I probably would have figured it out, but it just wouldn't have gone as smoothly. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was still kind of a long one, but still not nearly as long as my previous one, and hopefully better mic quality. So, all right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for future videos. Stay tuned for some podcasts coming up, and I'll catch you guys later.